My mother humiliated my children in front of everyone at the family barbecue. But I reminded them who the house really belongs to, and now they're begging me to come back. I'm 32 years old and I'm a man. I've been reading stories on this forum for months without writing anything, but after what my family went through recently, I felt I needed to share it. I'm still processing it, and it was my wife who encouraged me to put it in writing. So here it is. It all happened a few months ago, during the 4th of July celebration. As every year, my parents organized their usual family barbecue. My wife and I arrived with our children, Julian and Emma, around 2 p.m. My older brother, Adrian, 35, was already there, as always, next to Dad at the grill, talking to everyone about his new truck. It was a huge F-250, with custom wheels and every possible luxury. It probably cost him more than I earn in 6 months. But that's always been Adrian, a fanatic for the flashy, the model son, the favorite. I, on the other hand, was always the one who disappointed, the one who never quite fit in. Classic family dynamics. Everything was going well until what happened. Around 4 o'clock, Dad announced his traditional sparkler ceremony. I was watching with a smile because Julian and Emma love that, especially Emma, who gets excited about anything that sparkles. Dad started handing out the sparklers from a huge box he had bought. First, he gave them to Adrian's children, who are the oldest. Then he distributed them to all the cousins. I was counting in my head and it seemed like there was enough for everyone. But when it came to my children, it just passed them by. As if they weren't there. Julian looked at him, confused, and tugged at his shirt. "And what about us, Grandpa? Don't we have any sparklers?" My father, with that voice that could be heard throughout the yard, answered without blinking. "I only brought some for the grandchildren who behave well. Maybe next time your dad will teach them some manners." I felt a punch in my stomach. The commotion died down abruptly. My wife stood in the doorway with a tray, her face drained of color. Adrian's wife, Carolina, lowered her gaze, visibly uncomfortable, but said nothing. And Adrian simply smiled and told his children, "Come on, Grandpa knows who's special." Julian froze. Emma, though she didn't fully understand, sensed that something was wrong. I opened my mouth, but I wasn't sure what might come out. My hands were shaking. I thought that would be the worst moment of the day. I was wrong. An hour later, Mom called everyone for lunch. I watched her serve Adrian and Carolina perfectly grilled steaks with all the sides. Then she served my Uncle Ramiro and his wife steaks too. Even the invited neighbors received a good piece of meat. When he arrived at our table, he left plates of sausages for my wife, my children, and me. But they weren't good sausages, they were the cheap ones, the ones that taste like rubber. Emma noticed it right away. At only 6 years old, she's very observant. She looked at Uncle Ramiro's plate, then Adrian's, and finally her sausage. "Mommy, why don't we have meat as good as Uncle Adrian's?" she asked. My mother stopped. And with a fake smile that made me shudder, he said, "Well, dear, some families earn good things, and others don't. It's just that your father doesn't work as hard as your uncle." He said it with complete composure. Above me, in front of my entire family and half the neighborhood. The silence was absolute. Everyone staring at their plates as if they had suddenly become fascinating. My wife got up so fast she knocked over the plastic chair. She didn't say a word. She took Emma by one hand and Julian by the other, and went inside. I stood there for 10 seconds, staring at her. My mother looked back at me as if she were waiting for me to react, hoping I'd make a scene and play the victim. My father was still at the grill, pretending nothing had happened. Adrian happily ate his steak. Carolina, again, said nothing. Finally, I got up and followed my family without saying a word. I found them in the living room. My wife was helping Emma with her shoes while Julian sat looking confused. Emma was crying, not because of what Grandma had said, but because she knew her mother was sad. "Why is Grandma mean to us, Daddy?" she asked. I didn't know what to say. How do you explain that to a 6-year-old? That some people are just cruel. That Grandma thinks Daddy's worthless. I just told her, "I don't know, sweetheart. But we're going home now." As we walked toward the car, Adrian came out to meet us. Not to apologize. Just to make matters worse, he put a hand on my shoulder, like he wanted to comfort me. "Hey, bro, don't take it so personally. You know how Mom is. She only wants what's best for the family. And well, some kids need to learn their place from a young age. It's better they understand how the world works now than be disappointed later." Something clicked in my head. It wasn't a misunderstanding. This had been planned. Designed to make it clear what our place was. And Adrian was involved. I looked at him, in his expensive shirt, next to his ridiculous truck, smiling as if he'd given me some sage advice. I smiled back. Not a happy smile, but the kind you give when you decide you're not going to play by someone else's rules anymore. "You're right, Adrian. It's important to know your place." He stared at me, confused. I was already driving away. We drove back in silence, but my mind was already on something else. If they wanted to teach them a lesson, I was going to teach them a real one. Halfway through the journey, my phone vibrated. It was a message from my cousin Sylvia, Ramiro's daughter. We had always gotten along well. What was that? "My parents are furious." It was awful. Another message arrived right away. Adrian was laughing with his children after they left. He said something about teaching them a lesson. It made everyone uncomfortable. I thought she should know. I showed the message to my wife. She just shook her head. "At least someone in your family has some common sense." I couldn't sleep that night. I spent it pacing around the house until 2 a.m. My wife kept insisting I let it go, that we should just avoid family gatherings for a while and eventually everything would calm down. But I couldn't get what Adrian had said that time in the driveway out of my head. Some kids need to learn their place early on. As if my children were inferior to theirs. As if they deserved less, simply for being mine. It was at that moment that I knew what I had to do. About 6 years ago, I partnered with my brother Adrian equally to run the family construction business, just after our father's health began to decline. Although we were officially 50-50 partners, Adrian treated me like one of his employees, while he played the boss. I handled all the actual work, permits, inspections, client management, and crew supervision. He was always late, if he showed up at all, contributed little, and yet he still took all the credit. To make matters worse, our parents praised him without question, convinced that he was the true leader of the business, when in reality it was me who kept everything running. Being the one who actually runs the business gives you access to a wealth of information. And when your partner is a slacker who thinks he's above everyone else, he makes serious mistakes due to overconfidence. That Saturday morning I headed to the office. I spent the entire weekend reviewing documents, not just recent ones, but old files as well. I compiled a complete record, safety violations that Adrian ordered ignored, permits signed without even being checked, shoddy electrical work, insurance fraud. I had evidence of years of malpractice. But the biggest problem was something else. His electrician certification had expired in 2021, and he never bothered to renew it. The reason? The exam coincided with a Lakers game. For almost 2 years, he signed off on electrical work without a valid license. That means each of those projects, between 30 and 40 in total, was approved illegally. If anyone investigated, we could lose our contractor's license. But of course, he thought I was taking care of it. I had my certifications up to date, and I assumed that he, being an adult, would take care of his. I was obviously wrong. Then there was the matter of liability insurance. He was supposed to handle the renewals, but since he found it tedious, he left that task to me for the last few years. What I didn't know was that the policy had strict clauses regarding safety violations. If the insurance company discovered any of these irregularities, it could not only cancel the policy immediately, but also void it retroactively and demand reimbursement of all claims paid. We had 3 minor workplace accidents last year. But if the policy was cancelled, we would assume the entire debt. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. I photographed, printed, and cataloged every document, email, report, and record that proved negligence. It took me the entire weekend, but I was meticulous. On Monday, I made 3 calls, one to the insurance company, one to the state licensing agency, and the last to the OSA, all anonymous, with supporting evidence. When I mentioned the unlicensed electrical work, the woman who answered the call was immediately interested. Did you say electrical work without current certification? Yes, ma'am. I've had the documentation for almost 2 years. That's a crime. We need a formal complaint with the supporting evidence. You'll have it this afternoon, I replied. I hung up the phone and remained silent. In just 3 calls, I had jeopardized the business, the reputation, and perhaps even Adrian's freedom, should legal proceedings be initiated. But it wasn't over yet. Because my parents also needed a choice. They wanted to make distinctions between grandchildren, to decide who deserved special treatment and who didn't. It was time they saw what their exemplary son was worth. On Wednesday, around 9 in the morning, I was at the Hendricks construction site checking the foundation when my phone started ringing. It was Adrian. I let him go to the mailbox because I was busy and didn't feel like talking to him. He called again 5 minutes later. By the 4th call, I knew something was wrong. Where are you? I need you to come to the office now. We're having problems, he said, his tone completely different from his usual one, closer to panic than his typical arrogance. What kind of problems? It's about the Johnson project. That was our biggest client, a $200,000 commercial renovation that sustained us for the entire year. Adrian insisted on managing it personally, hoping to take all the credit if it went well. I drove to the office and found him pacing back and forth in his pajamas, disheveled, looking like he hadn't slept. Johnson called this morning, he said without saying hello. They're furious about a problem with the permits. Something about rejections and delays. I don't quite understand. Can you take care of it? I turned on my computer and opened the project file. In less than a minute I knew what was wrong. The permits had been rejected 3 weeks earlier due to electrical design flaws. Adrian, who was supposedly leading that project, never followed up. It was rejected on June 15th, I told him. 3 weeks ago. What have you been doing? He looked at me, confused. Rejected? Nobody told me anything. Why don't you ever check your email? Look, I showed him the screen, where the rejection notice was still unopened, along with 2 more emails from the permits office requesting corrections. Her face went pale. And now, how bad is it? Very. The Johnson project is 3 weeks behind schedule, and they don't even know it. We can't move forward with the electrical work until the new plans are approved, and that will take at least another 2 weeks, if we're lucky. Can you fix it today? I looked at him silently for a moment. 2 months ago, I would have done it without a second thought. I would have worked tirelessly to fix his mess. But not this time. I had to pull strings, pay urgent fees, do whatever it took to cover his back. But that day I decided no more. Not after my daughter asked me why she didn't deserve good food like everyone else. No, Adrian. This is your project, your responsibility. You solve it. What's that supposed to mean? He yelled at me from the office. You always take care of the permits. Not anymore, I said coldly. You wanted to be the main partner, didn't you? Well, it's time you proved it. I grabbed my keys and left. I could still hear him yelling at me from the doorway as I was getting into my truck. About 20 minutes later, I called Mr. Johnson. Good morning, Mr. Johnson. I'm calling regarding the permits for your project. I'm afraid Adrian didn't inform you, but we've had the permit rejected for 3 weeks now. The electrical design doesn't meet current codes. We're going to have to redesign that entire section. Are you saying my project has been on hold for 3 weeks and nobody told me anything? He snapped after a few seconds of silence. That's right, sir. I found out myself this morning when Adrian asked me to look into it. How long will it take to fix this? If we start today, we estimate between 4 and 6 weeks, provided the redesign is approved on the first try. But given how badly this has been handled so far, I recommend you consider other options. I offered you the names of 3 competent companies that knew what they were doing and didn't have someone like Adrian making decisions. That same day, Johnson canceled the contract. $200,000 lost. Adrian called me about 50 times, but I was busy. 3 of our most important clients found out about the permitting problem through third parties and wanted to discuss the future of their projects. In this business, news travels fast. On Thursday, workplace safety inspectors arrived. 2 serious-looking men, clipboards and cameras in hand. They spent the morning visiting the active construction sites, asking questions, and taking photos. The workers were visibly tense. We all knew we had been cutting costs on Adrian's orders. And yes, they found exactly what I suspected: safety violations, inadequate fall protection, employees without the required equipment. All because Adrian had said that nothing would happen. The preliminary report arrived in my email on Friday morning. $75,000 in fines, spread across 4 different projects. And that was just the beginning. That same afternoon, the state licensing board called Adrian. They wanted to interview him about his electrical certification, especially regarding over 40 projects where he had signed off on installations without the proper permits. What the hell is going on, he kept saying. How is all this coming to light at once? It doesn't make any sense. I just shrugged. Bad luck, I guess. The following Monday, our insurance company notified us that they had received an anonymous complaint about safety violations. They would initiate a full policy review. All claims were suspended. If they discovered willful negligence, they could retroactively revoke our coverage for the past 2 years. We had 3 workers' compensation claims totaling $45,000. If they canceled those, we'd have to pay everything back. And without an insurer willing to cover us, we'd be personally exposed to any future incidents. Adrian began to fall apart. He stopped shaving, wore the same clothes every day. He locked himself in the office making calls, trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. But you can't fix 3 years of bad decisions in a week. By Tuesday, 2 more clients had left. Our surety company withdrew its support, so we could no longer compete for commercial bids. The bank called us, worried about the business loan payments. Our accounts were in the gutter. I don't understand how everything fell apart so suddenly, Adrian kept repeating. It seems like someone's sabotaging us. That's ridiculous, I replied calmly. It's just a run of bad luck. While he was panicking, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. It's funny how in this line of work everyone knows who's really doing the job. 3 former clients called to ask if I was planning to start my own business. What would happen if I did that? By the end of that week, I already had enough commitments for the next 6 months. I just needed a business license and insurance. Unlike Adrian, I knew how to get them. On Friday, the bank canceled all our loans. We lost our biggest clients. We were heavily fined, we lost our insurance coverage. Banks get scared easily. Who would have thought it? Adrian was on the verge of bankruptcy. The house, the huge truck, everything was going to be lost. He would have to start from scratch at 35 years old. But the most interesting thing happened on Saturday morning. Adrian called me crying. Really crying. Brother, I'm going to lose everything. Mom and Dad said I can come back and live with them until I recover, but it's so humiliating. Going back to them. That's when I remembered something I'd been trying not to think about. Adrian wasn't the only one who was going to learn some lessons about effort and deservingness. My parents had already made it clear, at that family gathering, what they thought of my family. It was time to show them what their golden boy was really worth. "I'm sorry, Adrian. I can't help you with that," I told him. "But I'm sure Mom and Dad will figure it out." I hung up. I stared at my phone for a few seconds, then got in the truck and headed to my parents' house. Well, the house. That was about to change. During the drive, I went over everything I was about to say. 3 years had passed since I'd kept quiet about the fact that I owned that house. I'd let them pretend, talk about renovations, about leaving it to Adrian someday, hold family gatherings, and act like they owned the place. All while they lived in the house I'd saved from foreclosure. The house they couldn't have kept without my help. I stopped in the same driveway where I learned what it meant to be the son who disappointed. Where Adrian was always the favorite. Where my own parents taught my children they didn't deserve sparklers like everyone else. It was time to make it clear who really owned all this. I found them in the living room, as always on Sundays. Dad was in his worn armchair watching some old western. Mom was on the sofa with her crossword puzzle and reading glasses. The television was blaring, as always. There were empty coffee cups, open newspapers, and remnants of a comfort that seemed to suggest they had no worries in the world. When they saw me come in, they looked at me with that expression that expected an apology for leaving the family barbecue early. Perhaps they imagined I'd changed my mind about their little lesson on family hierarchies. But that wasn't it. I told them about the call Adrian had made to me. That he was losing everything, the business, the house, the truck, and if things continued like this, probably his marriage too. He was desperate and wanted to come back and live with them while he recovered. Mom put the crossword puzzle down on her lap and nodded worriedly. "Of course he can come back," she said gently. "This has always been her home. Her room is just as she left it. She will always have a place here with us." Dad turned down the TV volume and talked about how the family should stick together during tough times. He said they'd figure something out. They even mentioned cleaning out the basement so Adrian's kids would have somewhere to play when they came to visit. Within minutes, they were already planning the furniture arrangement, suggesting bunk beds for the grandchildren, and acting like devoted parents supporting their child in times of crisis. "Actually, no," I said calmly. They both fell silent, as if I had interrupted them mid-sentence. "What?" Dad asked. "This isn't Adrian's house," I replied. The expression on their faces was priceless. Dad shook his head, as if he'd misheard. Mom watched me over her glasses, confused. Then I reminded her of what had happened in 2018. Dad's heart attack that March morning, when he collapsed in the kitchen and spent 4 days in intensive care while doctors fought to stabilize him. The medical expenses that began to pile up. The months of recovery without being able to work. And since the insurance covered some things, but not everything, I told them about the mortgage payments they stopped making. First 1, then 2, then 3. The bank letters Mom hid because she didn't want Dad to get upset. Until the foreclosure notice arrived in September, giving them 30 days to catch up or lose the house. Dad's face began to pale. Mom gripped her crossword puzzle so tightly her knuckles trembled. I reminded them of the call Mom made to me one October night, crying so much I could barely understand her. Between sobs, she confessed that they were about to lose their house, that they didn't know where to go or what to do. "But we made it," Mom murmured, more to herself than to me. "Yes, of course you did," I replied. "Because I bought this house." The silence that followed was perfect. There was the sound of the old clock in the hall, Mrs. Henderson's dog barking nearby, and Dad's ragged breathing. "I went to the bank," I continued. "I paid off the outstanding debt, the full amount, and completed all the paperwork to transfer the property to my name. This house has been mine for 3 years now." Dad tried to get up, but his legs wouldn't support him. That can't be. We never. Never what? I interrupted him. Did they never sign anything? They signed a lot of things. The foreclosure papers, the deed transfer, the waiver agreement. They were so worried about losing the house that they signed without reading. They trusted me to handle everything. I took out my phone and showed them the photos I had saved of each document, just in case this ever happened. Here's the deed. My name. Property taxes here. My name. The insurance policy. Also in my name. Legally, this house belongs to me. Mom shook her head, as if she could undo reality simply by rejecting it. We never agreed to that. We thought you were just helping us with the payments. They misunderstood. I handled everything through my lawyer to keep it discreet and avoid hurting Dad's pride. Because I believed the important thing was that they had a roof over their heads, not who was listed as the owner. I looked around. The family photos on the walls were all of Julian and his children at Christmas, at his wedding, and of his accomplishments. On the shelves were Dad's construction manuals and Mom's romance novels. On the coffee table, the marks from Sunday coffees for decades. But all that changed when Mom told my daughter she didn't deserve nice things. When she smiled as she explained that some families aren't entitled to good things because their father doesn't try hard enough. Dad managed to stand up. His face went from bewilderment to anger. You can't just take our house away. We raised you here. I'm not taking anything away. I'm reclaiming what I saved when you couldn't keep it. Then Mom burst into tears. Real tears, not the manipulative kind. Pure panic. And now where are we supposed to go? This is our life. These are our memories. I looked at her coldly. She was the same woman who, without remorse, had made my daughter feel worthless. The same one who had justified discrimination by disguising it as teaching. Well, go wherever you can, I replied. Dad appealed to family ties. He spoke of blood, of unity, of forgiveness. Because of the harm this would cause the family. The same man who denied my children the sparklers, saying that only good grandchildren deserve them. Mom, for her part, chose to blame herself. He asked me how I could throw elderly people out onto the street. What kind of son had I become? He said they would never speak to me again, as if that were a threat and not a blessing. You have 30 days, I told them as I headed for the door. Like any other tenant. Pretty generous, considering they never paid rent. I went outside and got into my truck. From the rearview mirror, I could still see them through the living room window. Dad with his head in his hands. Mom, frozen in front of the door, as if waiting for him to come back and say it was a joke. But it wasn't a joke. These were the consequences. It was time to pay the debt. And this time, not with money. The house where I was once raised. The same one I rescued from foreclosure. The place where my children had been humiliated. Soon it would have new residents. People who understand that all children deserve to feel valued. To be treated well and enjoy simple things like a sparkler at a party. 30 days. That was the deadline. They had to understand what it truly means to earn something. It was time to see if the golden boy knew his place. The eviction deadline was Tuesday. That morning, around 10, I stopped by the house just to see how things were going. The driveway was jammed with vehicles. Some motorcycles, my Uncle Ramiro's old car, and a moving van that had clearly seen better days. They were loading the last of the furniture when I arrived. My father, as if he still held authority, directed the chaos, giving orders about where to place the boxes. My mother, standing in the garden, held a lamp while she wept. Adrian had the face of someone who had just been through a storm. The stress of those 3 weeks and the legal troubles had aged him. I rolled down the window and asked, "How's everything going?" He looked at me with such obvious contempt, as if I'd stepped on something unpleasant. Seriously? Are you going to make fun of me now? I was just making sure they're out on time. I had the contractors arriving on Thursday to start the renovations. That wasn't entirely true. I was planning to do some renovations, but I hadn't hired anyone yet. I just wanted to get a little done, nothing more. My father approached the window. You should be proud of throwing your own family out on the street. They're not out on the street, Dad. Didn't they find an apartment yet? Indeed, they had rented a 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, which was eating up almost all of Dad's pension. Adrian was going to sleep on the couch, since he had no way to pay for anything on his own. His truck had been repossessed the week before. That's not the point, and you know it. This was our house. No, it was my house. I just let them stay. There's a difference. At that moment, Mom approached, still holding that absurd lamp. Your children will never forgive you for this when they grow up and understand what you did to their grandparents. My children know that decisions have consequences. Something their grandparents never learned. The moving truck left around noon. Adrian left in Dad's old car without even saying goodbye. My parents stood in the driveway a while longer, staring at the house as if they were waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. That afternoon, I called my wife at work. We're moving this weekend. Start packing. He was silent for a few seconds. Are you sure about this? It feels strange moving into your childhood home right after kicking them out. It's not their home anymore. It's ours. Julian and Emma deserve to grow up in a place where they always feel welcome. We moved in the following Saturday. The kids were thrilled with the space. I converted Dad's old workshop into my office. I hung my new business license on the wall, right where he used to keep his tool calendar. Somehow, it felt right. A month later, I was working there one Saturday morning when the doorbell rang. My wife had gone to the supermarket with the children. I looked out the window and saw them. My parents, standing on the porch. My porch. They looked even older. Dad was holding some papers, and Mom had that fake smile she used whenever she wanted something. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won out. I stood in the doorway, without inviting them in, like they were salesmen ringing doorbells. We need to talk, Dad said, trying to get inside. We're talking. What do you want? Mom burst into tears, right when we expected it. We made a mistake. We're sorry about the barbecue, about what we said to the children. We want to fix it. Dad picked up the papers. We spoke with a lawyer about the house. We think we can reach an agreement. That's when I burst out laughing. A genuine laugh, right in his face. Let me guess. The lawyer told you that because you've lived here for 3 years without paying rent, you might be able to claim some rights as tenants. Maybe even adverse possession. Dad's face confirmed I'd hit the nail on the head. Because I have all the documents, every mortgage payment, taxes, insurance, and the original deed. That lawyer just wants your money. This was the family home for 3 decades, Mom cried, now without fake tears. And now it's my family's home. My children deserve to grow up in a place where they aren't humiliated. A wild concept, isn't it? I was closing the door, but Dad stuck his foot in. Bad idea. You can't keep us away from our grandchildren. We have rights. Yes, I can. And I will. Because when you tell a 6-year-old girl she doesn't deserve good food because her father is a loser, you forfeit all right to be a grandparent. We said we were sorry. And I'm sorry, it doesn't erase what they did, or what they taught them. They showed my children who you are. I believe them. I firmly pushed Dad's foot away and closed the door. They continued ringing the doorbell and banging for about 10 minutes, but I turned up the TV and ignored them. Through the window, I watched them return to their car, defeated. Dad was downcast and Mom was really crying this time. My business grew faster than expected. In construction, reputation isn't everything, and when you keep your word, recommendations fly. By October I had a waiting list and I hired 2 more employees. Adrian called me several times in September. He wanted to know if I would consider hiring him. He said he'd learned his lesson and would do whatever it took. I told him I'd think about it, and I never called him back. I'd sometimes stop by the house. I saw him slowing down, looking toward the yard where his children used to play. He never stopped. He just drove by like someone visiting a cemetery. At Christmas, a card arrived from my parents, one of those impersonal ones, with a photo of the 2 of them, looking uncomfortable, in their tiny apartment. Inside, it simply said, "We hope you're happy," in Mom's handwriting. They didn't mention the children or show any interest in fixing things. It was just guilt in disguise that no longer affected me. And yes, I'm happy. Because when you teach your children that they deserve respect, love, and a place to belong, they grow up knowing exactly their worth.